Good evening, and welcome to the Carroll County Commissioners District 4 Candidates Forum. My name is Charles Harrison, and I'm chair of the Community Media Center Board of Directors. Tonight's forum is being held at the Mount Airy Senior Center. The program is being streamed live on the Community Media Center website and could be seen at www.carrollmediacenter.org. The program will be rebroadcast again on Channel 19 and Channel 23 beginning April the 30th. The Community Media Center has partnered with the Carroll County Times newspaper in an effort to bring an equitable forum to the political process that's here in Carroll County. We want to advocate for political expediency, and we want to be able to inform the public as to the candidates, what they stand for, and what their positions are. We encourage citizens to learn more about the candidates and to take an active role in the electoral process. At this time, I will turn the program over to our moderator for the evening, Mr. Wayne Carter, editor of the Carroll County Times, who will explain the rules and then open the candidates forum for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. All right, thank you all for being here tonight. As your moderator for the evening, I'm first going to introduce each one of the candidates. Each of the candidates will then have 2 minutes to give an opening statement. Following the forum introductions, I will then ask the first question, where each candidate will then have 2 minutes to answer that question, and we'll just move down the row. All candidates will answer the identical question. Just to be clear, this is not a debate, this is an informational forum. So at the conclusion of the question period, before the ending of the forum this evening, we will give each candidate 2 more minutes for a summary statement. All the responses are going to be timed, and the timekeeper will give the candidates a signal when 30 seconds remains. The timekeeper will ring a bell 2 to 3 seconds after the final stop signal is given, and at that point I might interrupt you and discontinue the statement or the answer at that time. The questions have been selected from those submitted in advance to the Carroll County Times and the Community Media Center, and from tonight's live audience. Tonight's forum is being recorded, so again, we ask everyone in the audience who may have just arrived, turn off your cell phones or silence your cell phones, and that you refrain from applause or making noise during the forum or doing anything visible or audible to express support or opposition to any candidate during the forum. And with that in mind, let us begin. And again, 2 minutes for an opening statement, and we'll start with Mr. Christopher Eric Bouchat, Republican.
Good evening, folks. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out on this rainy evening. Also like to thank my fellow candidates for making a sacrifice to run for public office. It's not easy. I am a resident of Woodbine, Maryland, and I am the founder of Bouchat Industries, Inc., established in 1994. And as a businessman, I wish to bring my conservative fiscal philosophies and experience to the board to run the county. We have elected both a businessman as governor and as president, and I think they're doing a fine job running our fiscal resources, both at the federal and state level. And I hope that I can have a chance as your representative and Commissioner of District 4 to do the same for you in running the county government. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, Mr. Paul Burkett, Republican.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Burkett. First off, I would like to thank my wife for my getting this far. We are all here tonight to provide our fellow citizens a choice. Your next commissioner is relying on you to make that choice the right one. My wife, Mary Jo, and I moved to Carroll County in May of 1978, so next month makes me a 40-year resident. Those years encompass adopting our 2 children as infants, raising our family, and including my entire professional career in Maryland's most livable county. All blessings. I was a practicing dentist for 38 years in Mount Airy, and I retired 2 years ago. My countless patients and staff over the years will attest that I ran the profession and business of dentistry with integrity and compassion and within strict budgetary principles. I will do the same as your commissioner. Since my retirement, I was open to more ways to give back to the community. When several prominent citizens suggested and encouraged me to run for commissioner, I was overwhelmed by their trust in me. I felt a moral obligation to accept. I stand for limited government, private property rights, the Second Amendment, a revised, stronger ethics ordinance, opioid prevention, protecting the rural and family values of Carroll County, and I stand up for the national anthem. My community involvement has always been paramount, and I've served on many boards and as president of numerous professional and community organizations, and volunteering in civic groups, Mount Airy Elementary School, and for handicapped children. I've always chosen my participation carefully because of my commitment to be a valued contributor rather than a roster member only. Being retired, time is on my side, and I will dedicate it to my role as commissioner. Throughout this campaign and my term of office, if elected, I am still a regular guy and gal just like everyone else, and I'm here to make a difference.
All right, thank you. Next up, Mr. Bret Grossnickle, Republican.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. And I'd like to thank you for this opportunity for you to maybe get to know me a little better tonight on who I am, what I stand for, and my views. Lived in Union Bridge for 34 years, but I lived in the Union Bridge area my entire life. Love the county, love the town. That's why I've been a councilman for 16 years, mayor for 8, planning commission for 7. And community service is my way of proving that it's better to be part of the solution than part of the problem. So thank you.
Okay. Next up is Mr. Paul Johnson, Democrat.
Good evening. My name is Paul Johnson. I want to thank the Media Center for sponsoring this forum tonight. I'm running for Carroll County Commissioner to help lead our county forward through difficult times ahead and give back to District 4. I'm running to focus District 4 representation on local issues, and I will lead by example. I want to make this crystal clear. I am not running for personal gain. My family and I moved to Mount Airy 20 years ago. We moved here to give our children the best public education we could find. Our children graduated from Carroll County Public Schools and are now college graduates with professional careers. Carroll County has served my family well, and I want to give back to the community. I grew up on the lower, slower Eastern Shore, surrounded by farms. I spent many weekends, summers working on farms. I am no stranger to hard work. I thank my father for this. I have a bachelor's degree in information systems management from the University of Maryland, and have had a successful 33-year career working in IT. I've heard it over and over, Paul, we need to stay focused on local issues. Do the work we elect our commissioner to do. Today, our county faces many local concerns. Our county salaries must become competitive. Our aging schools require modernization and routine maintenance. Our detention center requires infrastructure funding and eventually a new facility. Previous year expenditures that borrowed on future revenue are now coming due. These are just a few of the local issues we must address in the very near future. We must keep our counties focused on local solutions. I will work hard with anyone to do this. Together, we can.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Sean Shaffer, Republican.
I've also lived in Carroll County for 40 years, but for me, that's been a lifetime statement. I was born here. I'll probably most likely die here. And for me, this is an investment in my life and my future, as well as yours. And from what I've seen growing up with farms, green spaces, all I've seen is our county's been just dug up, paved over with homes, shopping, and just no infrastructure to support it. And to me, it just looks like the county is starting to rot rather than thrive. And I hope to bring back some of the more traditional values and expand, hopefully, our infrastructure and our jobs, and just bring back some of the progress and stability that we've had in the years that I lived with and benefited from growing up, and most likely I don't think we'll have shortly here in a few years.
Okay, thank you. All right, and with that, we'll start with our questions. Again, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and we'll just work our way down the row. We'll start with Mr. Bouchat. We had a couple come in from our audience about this, and I think the simplest way to phrase it is, what are your thoughts on the county's recently passed ethics ordinance? Do you believe it is stronger than the previous ethics ordinance, weaker, and what would you do to change it if elected?
Well, I had to fill one out, so I think it is stronger than the previous one. I'm satisfied with the ethics ordinance as long as it's in compliance with the state law and all other jurisdictions are meeting the same requirements. I'm open to suggestions if it needs to be modified. I'm no expert on it, but I keep my mind open if people have disagreements with the existing order. If it needs to be modified, I'd be willing to accept the discussions on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burkett.
Contrary to Mr. Bouchat, I am not satisfied with the current ethics ordinance as passed in March. It was stronger before it was even passed. It was passed in a hurry in order to get it done before the election, and then with the promise that it would be revisited after the election. I saw no point in that. It was never intended to be that way. The conflict of interest that was supposed to be combated in the original one was simply legalized and made okay in the second one, in the last one. It also, we have a situation where they require us to disclose every asset that we have, whether it's from here to kingdom come. But they don't require us to disclose our debts. Any candidate that's heavily burdened with debt is certainly more susceptible to graft, bribery, blackmail, fraud. And I'm totally dissatisfied with the ethics ordinance as it was passed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grossnickle.
I'm okay with the ethics ordinance as it was passed. I believe there was a lot of work, a lot of discussion, a lot of heartache over passing this ordinance. Honestly, if you elect ethical people, you don't need an ordinance. Pay attention to the people you elect, pay attention to what they're doing while they're supposedly serving you. And if you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. That's the American way. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Paul Johnson.
I agree with the ethics as it was passed. I think it's a good idea that we get out there what we have a conflict of interest in, and I have no problems with filling it out. I sent it in. When I first saw it, I was like, my goodness, I'm going to have to put everything I own out there. And then I was thinking, well, maybe it's a good thing they know exactly what I might be voting on. And they will know if I have to excuse myself, then that's a good thing because I have a conflict of interest or I need to get rid of those investments.
Okay, Mr. Shaffer.
I'm not pleased with the new ethics ordinance. The idea of making sure your politicians are ethical is not the issue I have, but the ordinance that was passed is just too broad. It doesn't focus on the actual relationships that you might have with businesses or other government entities, and just focuses solely on the money. And it also has a few questions about your family's money. Well, I know nothing about the businesses of my relatives, and I'm not about to ask them because I don't want to know. That would create the very conflict of interest that the ethics ordinance is supposed to address. So I don't want to know what their businesses are, so that way I wouldn't be in any conflict with them. And the entire issue is completely mishandled, wherein you pass it now, you're going to fix it later. You never do that with a law or an ordinance or code or regulation. It doesn't matter. You never do it. You never take something that's broken or isn't planned out and then decide, oh, well, we'll pass it now and look at it some other time. That other time is never going to happen. We're never going to see this again. And you know that if Maryland thinks that the current ordinance is within their standards, Maryland is never going to let us address this again. So that was a poorly mishandled boondoggle.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to our next question. Again, another question from the audience, and this time we'll start with Mr. Burkett. The question from our audience: people move to the county for many reasons. One is it's the safest county in Maryland. The sheriff's deputies and Carroll County teachers are leaving their employment here for higher paying jobs in other jurisdictions. It is widely known that law enforcement and educators are underpaid in comparison to our neighboring jurisdictions. If elected, how will you attempt to retain these valuable employees?
Relative to the sheriff's deputies, we are losing them because we're training them. They're excellent people, and they're turning around and leaving, causing us to have to retrain new people over and over. This is a tremendous cost. Why don't we divert that cost into raising their salaries and retaining them? The other thing, they have a disability policy that is about half what the industry standard is, at least in this area. The disability policy that I'm talking about is if a deputy is injured on the job and can't work, or if he, Lord help us, if he dies on the job, the family, either the deputy or the family gets about 30 to 35% of what their salary was for, I don't know what the duration, but they get about 35%, and it should be twice that. Basically, if they get injured on the job, if they die on the job, this should be simply an insurance policy. Why can't we pay the premiums and see to it that they're more adequately compensated? On the teacher side, I understand that their salaries are low. The Carroll County budget is very tight. The Board of Education receives an amount okayed by the Board of County Commissioners. The Board of Education must allocate that the proper way, and they must see to it that it's balanced, that the teachers get adequately paid. They'll have to cut elsewhere. I mean, every county agency has their hands out. They want money. Everyone has maybe a legitimate budget, but the county only has so much money to go around.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grossnickle.
Okay, I have to agree with Mr. Burkett that the county only has so much money to go around, and that is the bottom line to any of these discussions. Do I think that our law enforcement needs to make more money? Absolutely. So honestly, in the environment that law enforcement operates in nowadays, it's luckily Carroll County is not as bad as other jurisdictions, but it is different than it used to be. Same with teachers. Teachers, it's not the same as when I went to school. Teachers don't have the same powers for discipline and getting children to learn and sit and learn and pay attention that they once did. So their job is made more difficult. But it does come down to the money. And if you're unwilling to raise taxes, then you cut. And if elected, I would look at everything, the budget, the complete budget, and the tax rates, would look at what these salaries are in other jurisdictions, and certainly try to help to retain good people. That's what you want to do, but it does come down to the money.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnson.
This is one of my top concerns that I've heard from all the county officials that I've talked to, is getting adequate compensation for work well done. It's a conundrum that we're in right now. We have got to start finding ways to pay people what they are worth in this county. 15% less for our police force. That's what they're making. So if you look around at all the surrounding counties, we've got to become competitive with them. 15% less. Why should they work here when they can go to another county who has just as much need for law enforcement? 20% of them are leaving. 20%. Every year we lose 20% of our workforce. Do you realize how much it costs to find them, train them, bring them back in? The same thing with our teachers. There's no reason for our teachers to be here other than to just want to be here to teach our children when they can go a few miles away. If I'm elected, we've got to do economic development. Taxes are not an option. I pay my taxes. They're high. I don't want to pay anymore. I'm not raising taxes. My plan is we need to find some IT firms. We're surrounded by IT communities. Get some small firms up here. Do some economic development. That's my plan.
Okay. Mr. Shaffer.
Well, it's not just the police and teachers who are having issues with their salaries. This is something across the board for everyone. And I just don't entirely see how we can keep focusing on just two particular job sectors. Everybody needs more money. The last election cycle, when I spoke with the sheriff's department, the deputy who was discussing the budget kept hammering that point over and over and over again. They need more money. They did all this training. They need more money. And I had to keep telling her, stop telling me you need money. I know you need money. Everybody does. Everyone. It's like 100% of the county. Nobody is getting paid what they were worth, what they work for. So this isn't a completely economic budget issue that needs to be addressed. And a large portion of why governments, it's just not affordable, is that when tax income comes in, most of that tax burden is you. Not the corporations, not some of these other institutions, it's you. You pay the tax burden on everything. And since you have the lowest income, this means we get the lowest taxes. So it just needs to be completely revamped across the board. We just can't sit here and focus on two job sectors.
Okay. Mr. Bouchat.
Well, our budget's tight, and it's going to get even tighter. We have state mandates coming down to provide resource officers for the schools. We're going to start taking over the salaries of emergency services. On top of the demand of more money for the teachers and law enforcement, it makes it very difficult for this county to meet those financial needs. 90% of our county's receivables are from your income tax and your property tax. So in order for us to meet these demands, we have two choices. We either raise everyone's tax rates, which me as a Republican will not do, because I believe that stunts our economy, or we expand our tax base. We have to have more taxpayers, be they corporations with property tax that we can utilize without having students put in our school system, because increasing our school student population puts an even bigger strain on us, since the school budget makes up 50% of our expenditures. So it's important for us to run this county like a business and develop a good, solid business base to expand our tax base on corporations so we don't overtax the citizens. I must say I'm a little bit impressed that the Democrat on this panel sounds more like a conservative Republican.
All right. Well, with that in mind, quite a few of you talked about this, the economic development of the commercial tax base. So with that in mind, and we'll start with Mr. Grossnickle this time, where should the county focus its efforts to grow its tax base? Should it be commercially, residentially, and should the county work with municipalities to encourage growth within town and city limits, or focus efforts on the designated growth areas within the county?
Okay. We should definitely focus on commercial and industrial and work with the municipalities. That's where your water and sewer centers are. And I'm not a fan of residential growth at this time. I think we've had enough. I think the more residential growth you have, the more burden you place on the taxpayers, because you don't have the jobs for the people to work within the county. I know that's a consideration for some people, but we have a economic development faction within the county, and that's what they do. And one hopes that they're doing the best job that they can do. So I'm not sure what more that we could do to attract businesses. Businesses need workers, and they need consumers. They need a product to sell. They need an avenue. They need to be close to major highways, depending on the business. But I honestly believe that we're doing the best we can do. And perhaps if we slow the residential aspect of it down a little bit to allow the commercial and the industrial to catch up, that we might be a little better off down the road.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
I want to agree with Mr. Shaffer over here. I left out a very important part of our county, and I have so much respect for them. I've seen so much of it, and that's our county employees. So thank you very much for reminding me of that. I talked about IT firms coming in here. There's a need. If you look out in Montgomery County, you look in Howard County, not so much in Frederick, it's very expensive to operate up there. And I do believe that we can get small IT firms up here. Somehow we can do it. We've got the Warfield area, Harrison Leisure. Water's limited. IT doesn't take water. We can do something. But to do it, we're going to have to start planning. Planning has been a bad word in this county. It's not a bad word. It has been cut to the bone. All of our departments have been cut to the bone, but so is planning. And I do believe we've got to invest a little bit in planning to get some economic growth in here. We can't just say, let me put a building up here. Hey, it's over here. We've got to get out there and advertise what's up here. So that's my plan.
Okay. Mr. Shaffer.
I'm always been a little bit wary of the term development, largely because what are we going to put there when we've built it? And in most cases, there's nothing there. Last election cycle down here in this area, they were talking about Gillis Falls development. And I was of the opinion, well, I don't care if you build Gillis Falls or not, it's just, but if you do build it, what are you going to put in it? And there's a lot of developments up in Westminster, like near the airport, where you can find a lot of industrial firms, and there's these huge industrial parks. There's only one company in there, or there might only be two companies in there. What are you going to do with all this space that, before were productive farms making produce, which provides jobs for people? And then you turn around, you pave it over, you build a building for a corporation. They don't hire anybody. I actually walked into the Brent's building out there by the airport. I got turned away because I dared to walk in with a paper resume. It's like, how can you, develop jobs like that? How can you develop any sort of interest if you're going to turn people away simply because they walked through the door looking for a job? They don't even hire employees from Carroll County. They go to some firm in Pennsylvania to get temp workers. So how can you build these parks and these industries, bring businesses in, and that they don't hire anybody? So we really need to start focusing on making sure these businesses fulfill the promises they make.
Thank you. Mr. Bouchat.
I agree with a lot of what the other panelists have said, and it's very difficult for us. But the one thing we lack in this county to push forward that economic development is the leadership and the figurehead within the county government to cheerlead this progress that we need for getting an expansion in our industrial tax base. And I'm hoping that as a businessman on the board, I can provide that leadership. People need to communicate with their county what their needs are and have someone in office, not just a bureaucrat and an administration that they're dealing with, but an actual elected official to provide the leadership. We need figureheads that can go out and meet with businesses, talk up the assets of our county. Our county has a lot of assets that are not being utilized. The people are our greatest asset. The second greatest asset is our rural heritage. People would like to live here. But we have to have the leadership necessary to get the proper economic development, and a balance needs to be reached between some residential development and diverse spectrums of what we might need to satisfy our children that are growing up and going to college and want to live here. They can't even live here. There's no housing for them. And a cycle needs to take place for that, along with employment. But it is imperative that we have in county government a leader who can provide that guidance for the future of our county.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Burkett.
We need to be careful. If we advertise to bring more business in, if we advertise to bring more residential development in, we have to be careful that Carroll is going to change from what people are attracted to already. Carroll is a wonderful place to live. Carroll is a fragile place to live because if we keep advertising to try to do economic development, rapid growth, Carroll is not going to be what it always was. And we're going to, sometimes we may be careful what we ask for because we might get it. But yes, according to Mr. Bouchat, we do need leadership up there, and we need to have leadership that understands how to temper the growth and balance it with residential, business, and light industry. We need to do it all.
Okay. All right, sort of sticking on the topic for economic development, what do you believe that incentives are appropriate in order to lure businesses and employers to Carroll County using, taxpayer dollars to bring them here? And we'll start with Mr. Johnson.
I have actually thought about that question a few times, and to be honest, I don't have an answer for that. It would have to, in order to get them to come here, we're going to have to make it attractive. We're going to have to build we're going to have to build a little bit. But that's what the planning department would come in here to do. They would come in, advertise, get it out there, see if the need exists for what I'm even talking about. I think it's there. In order to lure them up here, there would have to be some kind of tax incentive for them for a certain period of time. I think we get young people and young professionals up here. They live here. They're going to see what it's like. Eventually, they're going to move here. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. So to answer your question, I don't think I fully did, but it would have to be some kind of tax incentive.
Okay. Mr. Shaffer?
I'm wary of providing incentives to corporations, particularly when they don't fulfill their promises. And if we're going to have discussion over tax issues, how could we sit here and say, oh, well, yeah, if Amazon brings their headquarters to Maryland for 5 years, we'll let them be here 5 years tax-free. Well, there you go. Billions of dollars of taxes gone down the drain. And now you've got budget issues that you can't work out. Well, maybe you shouldn't have let them be here tax-free for 5 years then. And some other incentives have been like traffic developments. You build new roads for these facilities. Well, just down the street from where I live at the quarry, they built a huge, big, like 4-lane road. Never use it. Not a single dump truck has ever used that huge 4-lane road they just built for them so they could get to 31 without driving through residential neighborhoods. Well, guess what? For the past 10 years, they've been driving through residential neighborhoods. So I just don't understand why we're providing incentives to people who you can't follow through. So no, I really want to be careful who we give incentives to. And if we give incentives to somebody and they just can't hold up their end of the deal, I'll send them a bill. I'll have them pay that incentive back.
Mr. Bouchat?
As a businessman, this might surprise you, but I'm against corporate welfare. Businesses need to carry their weight just like all of us do. I don't think they should get exemptions or deductions. They should be wanting to come here because of the county's assets that it possesses. So I'm not for giving corporations any type of tax break or incentive, but I think that our tax rates need to be competitive and fair, just like they should be for individuals. There should be no special treatment for businesses over its citizens.
Okay. Mr. Burkett?
I'm not an expert on economic development, but we do have experts that work for the county. Sometimes we have to defer to them, let them establish a plan. In the plan, I'm looking at what are incentives. You have lower taxes or tax benefits. You have decreased regulation. You have to eliminate red tape. But how can you justify giving a tax incentive to this business to bring them in and not the other businesses that are already here that are producing for the county? I think we have to trust our planners. I think we have to learn to trust, but we also need to be leaders and oversee the planners so they're not getting too overzealous and going too far one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grossnickle?
Like the rest of them, I think that's a tough question. I'm like Mr. Bouchat, I don't believe in tax incentives. I believe that if that's the difference between an industry or a company located in Carroll County, then maybe they're not going to make it anyhow, because the amount of tax incentive that we could offer can't be enough to tip the scales for them to want to locate here. I know in Union Bridge, when we lost our grocery store, we were trying to attract another store. It did not make financial sense for anybody to locate in Union Bridge. It wasn't there. There was no amount, well, we couldn't afford to offer them much in the way of a tax incentive anyhow, but it wouldn't tip the scales. It wouldn't make the difference. So if you have to offer some incentives, then as long as it's a positive outcome for the county at the end of that incentive, then if that's what it takes sometimes, it's all different. Every one of them is going to be different. Who they're going to hire, you're going to make money off of the income taxes of the people that work for the company, and if it's a high-paying company, you're going to get more tax out of it. So it's not black and white. It's not cut and dry, but it's a process. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Shaffer, we'll start with you for this next one. What do you believe the county's strategy should be for the upkeep of its existing infrastructure?
It's going to need some work. We need to have a regular maintenance plan on our roads, and well, some of our infrastructure is privately owned, so I can't really talk about like power lines because that's run by BG&E. But yeah, our infrastructure needs a regular maintenance schedule, and I'm not entirely sure if what we have in plan or if we're executing it well, because particularly in some of the more rural areas of the county, there's still some roads that aren't even paved. I don't even know how after all these years we can't even pave the road entirely. So yeah, we need to have a more regular schedule in maintaining our infrastructure, and we need to also incorporate new infrastructure as it comes in. The new fiber optic network that they want to build and expand, and the plan that they just discussed it's horrible. It's not even going to be manageable. And I think that this really needs to be looked at, and we'd really need a really more comprehensive schedule in maintaining our infrastructure and bringing in new capability.
Okay. Mr. Bouchat.
Well, I'd like to agree with Mr. Shaffer. My father spent his career in industrial maintenance, and he told me the key to maintaining equipment is having preventative maintenance. You need to stay on top of what you have before it goes bad, because once it goes bad, then you have capital expenditures. So it's important to us to be in front of the maintenance, stay on top of it, and have revolving schedules on all the things historically that we look over that we need to maintain, so we know that we'll have the same pattern in the future. So we'd save money if we stayed on top of things before they broke down. Thank you.
Mr. Burkett.
The majority of our infrastructure is supported by the state of Maryland. We have not gotten our share of the funding or of the attention from the state of Maryland in the 8 years of the O'Malley administration. What happens? Our gas tax sets up a fund that is dedicated to the roads, the highways, and the bridges. Well, Mr. O'Malley runs a little short on his operating budget. He decides to take it out of our infrastructure fund. That has not gone back, and that fortunately, with our present governor, we are gaining a little bit back, but it's going to take a long time. We're still in a catch-up mode. So as far as the county's concerned, I will work with the Public Works Department. I will develop trust in some of their experts, and we will develop a plan to gradually get our roads and bridges back in shape.
Okay. Mr. Grossnickle.
Honestly, I think Carroll County's got some of the best roads in the nation. What he said about losing the highway user funds, that hit municipalities and the counties really hard when they did that. They took like 85% of the funds. You don't get them anymore. So for the Union Bridge, instead of getting $80,000, we might have got $16,000 to maintain our streets. So definitely had to. They kept saying alternative funding sources. There are no alternative funding sources. It's you folks, us. We all pay taxes. But honestly, Carroll County does a pretty good job on their roads, as far as I'm concerned. Their bridges, I don't know. I'm not a bridge technician. But I'll tell you where we tend to fall behind is in water and sewer infrastructure. When your pipes are in the ground, you forget about them. Next thing you know, it's 60, 80, 100 years. You have a lot of old pipes in the ground. You lose a lot of your treated water to leaks. Most places have 20 to 25% unaccounted water amount that you treat that you're not billing for because you're losing it in the system. And we're playing catch up on that right now. The new stormwater laws, as they come in, that's changed a lot of things. People have to start spending money on their runoff, and it is making a difference. But I think the county overall, I think they do a pretty good job.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnson.
We have 150 bridges in this county, and if I heard this correctly from Mr. Zaleski, we have 1 million storm drains out there that are going to have to be maintained, replaced, rehabbed by 2030. So I do not see any funding coming from the state, and it's going to have to come from within the budget. So for the next 4 years, next 6 years, we're going to have to, it's going to have to be in the plan for longer.
Okay. All right, we'll move back to the this end of the table here from Mr. Bouchat. What do you believe the county government's role should be in combating the opioid epidemic, and what else can be done?
Well, this is an issue that's very personal to me because I lost my daughter to opioids last year, and it was a driving factor in me becoming a candidate for county commissioner. I'd been apprehensive about doing it, but after having lost my daughter, I realized that as someone in public life, I have an obligation to stand up and speak about the difficulties that addicts go through and their loved ones, and what role we as a community and county government can do in solving the problem. It affects all of us, whether it's someone in your family or not. It affects you in your insurance policies, your homeowners, your health insurance. It's driving everything up. What we can, as a county, can do, I believe we need to sue the opioid manufacturers, just like we sued Big Tobacco. They are responsible for the epidemic that we are in. And until we stop the supply that's coming at us from the pharmaceutical industry and the doctors who overprescribe and turn normal people into addicts, we'll never get this thing under control. So it's important for us as a county to sue the opioid manufacturers with numerous other states and municipalities and put the pressure on to shut the valve off that's feeding their communities with opioids. And until we get on top of that and stop that supply, our battle's hopeless. So we have a responsibility as a community to sue and shut these companies down so that only the people who are under severe pain or need pain management are getting opioids, not flooding the market and turn normal people into addicts. My daughter didn't start out as a heroin addict. She started out as a pill addict. Well, she started out taking pills from a doctor. And once that supply stopped, she turned to the streets for heroin. And that's where we're at with numerous honest citizens out there turning into addicts. And until we attack the opioid manufacturers in the pharmaceutical industry, it's hopeless. So it's our responsibility to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Burkett.
To some degree, suing the opioid manufacturers is an overreach. I think we need to be careful with this. Every time we're looking to put, we're looking for a scapegoat, and I think they're somewhat guilty. But there's so many other factors. It's a combination of factors. Actually, the opioid crisis started about 4,000 years ago. It just started taking off in the mid-'90s. And I talked to another expert that told me that, and I believe it. The other thing, I was a prescriber. And I know that cutting the opioids, cutting the manufacturers is a fragile thing. I prescribed the drugs, the Vicodins and the Percocets, and the OxyContins. I prescribed them carefully with a lot of judicial thought went behind it. But people were in pain. I had to take care of it. In my profession, there was a lot of times people were in pain, and I had to take care of it when they came in. And I always couldn't do it by procedures and operations or anything like that. I had to supplement it with these opioids. That said, there are so many treatment options available, and there's almost as many treatment options available as there are cases that need treated. And I'll say we need to be reactive. I say we need to keep Narcan in our car. We need to be trained to use it. We need to jail the distributors and keep them behind bars, not let them be released. Proactively, we need to educate our students early. It's not going to cost that much for a teacher to give 5 or 10 minutes every couple of days in school from first grade on up. Reinforce it all the way up through school. Keep them educated. Look at the prescription practices of doctors, like Eric said. I'm going to reach out to wallflowers, angry and depressed kids. And whether you agree with it or not, we need to close our borders to stop the flow.
Thank you. Mr. Grossnickle.
I have to agree with both these gentlemen. They've said a lot and a lot of right things. The only thing I could say in addition to that, and Mr. Burkett touched on it, is locking people up. I think the price for dealing opioids, be it prescription or non-prescription or heroin, crack cocaine, crystal meth, whatever your drug of choice, but the price for dealing needs to be so severe that it will deter some, not all. Some people are just going to do it anyhow. They just are. But let's at least try to stop the percentage of those who don't want to go to jail for the rest of their life for dealing. And maybe that's what it takes. I know it seems harsh, but it's going to take something severe to change it. Right now, I guess they get caught. They go to, maybe they go to jail for a year, a couple years, 5 years. Some of them don't care. Inside isn't much different than outside for the lifestyle that they have to live. So let's make it tougher. Education, I think, is a good thing, but simply pointing to a kid and telling them don't do drugs, I don't think is going to work. I think they need to see the effects of drug abuse at a young age when they can. I know it's shocking and you don't want your child to see that, but believe me, if you watch television, they see so much worse than that on TV. Shock them. Show them what happens to people when they do heroin for a long time. And maybe that'll help.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
It's very complicated. The federal government's been trying to solve this problem ever since Nancy Reagan was in the White House. And I met Nancy Reagan, if you remember back then. I talked with a couple health professionals after listening to Commissioner Howard during the budget sessions over the past couple of weeks. And I thought, that's a really good idea that needs to be investigated. What can we do in this county to help? What they came away with was mandated treatment does not work. We should have hot spots in this county where drugs are, and we should have the police monitor them, get them in front of the legal system, enlighten them to make life changes, not put them in jail, but once they get in front of that judge, at least maybe they're going to wake up. The other thing we could do is work with the state to limit milligrams that can be prescribed per month so that we don't get into overprescribing. Stop the pill mills. We can monitor what the drug usage is. And here's something that I just heard about today, and I thought it was a very good idea. And that was in Annapolis, they have a program that's going on. It's called Safe Stations. And it's a place where somebody who thinks that they are in crisis or they really want to seek treatment, they can go to. And that would be our fire stations. It's an idea. Get out there, get them a place where they can go to, that it's safe for them to say, hey, I have a problem, I need help.
Thank you. Mr. Shaffer.
This conversation started out with prescription drugs and has now deteriorated a little bit into illegal drugs. But the crisis we have currently at this moment is still characterized as the guy, often depicted as a minority, standing on a street corner selling drugs in a little plastic baggie, but the fact of the matter is, your drug dealer this day is your pharmacist. It's your doctor. And this entire focus on pretty much a version 2.0 of the war on drugs keeps talking about illegal activity. This activity isn't illegal. Your federal government regulates it. They created the problem. The federal government isn't going to fight this. They made it. And so what's the county going to do about a situation where a federal agency just can come in on high and say, no, it's okay, you have to let them do it? Because that just happened where the pharmacy company that makes fentanyl, they tried to slap down the largest fine they've ever had, and then another government agency steps in and says, no, you can't do that, just give them a slap on the wrist. So what are you going to do about it when you have a solution or you think you have a solution to a problem and then somebody tells you, no, you can't use your solution? So this entire issue needs to be addressed. I mean, here in Carroll County, you're going to have a little bit of a headwind trying to fix a problem when all the agencies above you say, no, you have to let them do it. So this is a serious issue that needs to be addressed not just with your local politicians. You need to bring this up with your state and federal politicians too, because they're part of the problem.
Okay, thank you. All right, for this next question, we'll start with Mr. Burkett. Recently, the Maryland General Assembly passed enabling legislation that gives county government authority over fire and emergency services. What do you see as the best path forward for emergency services in Carroll County?
I see that the emergency services at this time, all volunteer services are extremely, they're overworked and they're hard pressed to keep people available for the calls. Consequently, we've needed paid paramedics. I mean, we can't have a paramedic jumping out of bed and getting dressed every time somebody has a heart attack. We've got to have one on the spot. So we need a full-time person. And this is going to increase, and I can understand why. However, my concern with paid personnel, especially if it's paid by the government, is government sneaking into control of our once all volunteer fire department. I think this is fine if we allow or promote paid personnel, which I think we're going to have to. I think we need to maintain, or at least insist that we maintain control, the channel of control through the volunteer system.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grossnickle.
Paid fire and rescue is inevitable, especially as you grow. The bigger you get, the more you're going to need paid positions. I think we need to embrace that and plan for it.
Thank you,
Just
Mr. Johnson.
recently-
Good start.
Oh, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Just recently, and at the state level, they just passed legislation that has now enabled the county to have an advisory council started to actually assist and talk to and work with the commissioners to implement a countywide fire system or fire control while maintaining the volunteer services. 90% of the EMSs in this county are paid for by the local fire departments and companies. What happens there is when one of them is sick or they're short-staffed, they're not allowed to go to they can't borrow the technicians. The only way that we're all going to stay safe when this happens is by having the county have them cross-trained and work with them so that they can share employees amongst themselves. It's a necessary thing. We're headed there, and I agree with you. We're headed towards having a paid service. The county needs to get ahead of it. I don't know how it's going to be funded, but it is coming at us. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Shaffer.
I I'm going to admit to be a little bit confused about this issue. We get one person, if you look in this, one person talk about how the county is now authorized, but then say that the state's going to come in and take control, and then you hear another issue wherein they're going to be paid by state funds, but then talk about how are we going to pay for it? I'm a little bit confused, to be honest, as to what the devil is everybody arguing over. And I don't see what is it that this new law has taken away from us? What does it give us? It's a little bit confusing when you hear two sides of the argument at the same time whenever you read an article about this or you talk to somebody about this. I honestly don't care if our emergency services are paid or volunteer, as long as we have emergency services. I don't understand what's the problem about making them salaried employees. Go ahead. I don't have a particular issue with that. But I do want to keep local control over the emergency services, because when you need help and you're calling for help, and you're picking up the phone and you're calling 911, I hope you're talking to a local service in the local area who's going to be able to get to you fast, so you're not caught in some boondoggle of red tape and bureaucratic messaging back and forth between dispatch systems. I don't really care where the money comes from, but, we need to focus on who's going to have control, who's going to be authorized. If this is going to be a Carroll County service, then it better be our service, not just Carroll County service in name only.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bouchat.
Well, there's 14 independent fire companies across the county, and their overall expenditures annually amount to about $12.5 billion. Some of that they generate on their own. Matter of fact, most of it they generate on their own, and then the county picks up the rest. Well, with mandates that continue to come down from the state and federal government and uniformity in emergency services, it's inevitable. Their fire departments are going to be ultimately taken over by us as county citizens, and we'll have to finance them. And that goes back to the whole issue of the problem we have in the county is money. Where do we get the money? We're in a very tight situation, but it's imperative, especially with baby boomers retiring and going into their senior years, that we're having stress put on emergency services for ambulatory care. There's stress from the opioid epidemic, and we have to get on top of this by controlling emergency services. It's just too vital of an institution, an organization, for us not to have management over. And I didn't always feel that way. As someone who's all about limited government, I had a different opinion until recently when I met with the president of Winfield Fire Department. And he made it very clear to me that all 14 fire departments want this to happen. So for us to oppose it is this complete foolishness. We have to do something about our finances to address this. And that's stuff in our future we're looking at. And it all comes down to ultimately economic development to generate money. We need to run this county like a business. We need more money coming to finance these things, and we don't presently have it.
All right, thank you. That leads well into our next question, since you brought up the money. And we'll start with Mr. Grossnickle on this one. Do you believe the existing revenues being generated are sufficient to effectively cover the necessary expenditures in Carroll County? And if not, how would you propose generating more revenue for the county?
It's a loaded question. No, the revenue's never enough. To put it simply, it's never enough for everything that you want to do and everything you would like to do. I think it's adequate. I believe that we can make our revenues work for now. If we add paid fire and rescue, it's going to make a difference. But you could also make an argument for raising taxes at that point, because the money that people give for fundraising, they'll no longer be giving for the fundraising. So there is that pool of money out there that one could make the argument that you would take that then through taxes. But I'm against raising taxes. I'm a taxpayer. We're all taxpayers. We don't want to pay more taxes. But on the other side of that, if we have to provide more services or the cost of those services goes up, honestly, that's about the only place there is to go for it. If it's not an enterprise fund, then it's tax fed. So, yeah.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
I think the current budget was set at $411 million. I think that's what the figure came out at the very end. It's not enough, and our needs are always, our wants are always going to exceed our needs. We're going to either have to trim the wants because our needs are going to be great over the next 5 years after looking and hearing what I've heard with the budget. So we've got to get economic development into this county, and I think we need to bump up our planning department a little bit and look at how we can get light industry in here that doesn't consume water. We've got to make ourselves a little bit more affordable at the housing side. There is a young, I think somebody else mentioned this, and it has been one of the things, concerns that I've had for a long time. My son can't even, he's a college graduate working in IT. He can't even get down to Gaithersburg's where he's got to work, and he's trying to get affordable housing. Errol said it, affordable housing. I'm not talking about affordable housing. I'm talking about housing that we can get in this county where our teachers can live here, and our emergency services can live here, and our police can live here, and our county employees can live here. I don't see any problem with that. If they live in this county, they're paying taxes. That's one way to get our revenue up. Thank you.
Mr. Shaffer.
Yeah, housing is a particular issue. Not far down from the road where I live, they just built $1 million house, finally sold for $300,000. So, yeah, not only is housing not affordable, but house prices and their actual values, they're completely different from what you're told when you go to look for a house. And as far as making money, and running the county as a business, does anybody know how Wall Street makes their money? They pull it out of their ass. That's literally how they do it. They take a piece of paper, they write a number on it, that's their income. That's all they do. They just invent it. And they're legally allowed to do that by law. And so I don't particularly see how, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I don't particularly see an issue as to, well, the county needs more money. Okay, we'll invent it. Why not? Good enough for everybody else. You just can't make the revenue you need just from taxes alone. It's not going to work. We're going to need other revenue streams. And for a government body, that usually means more fees for when you go to do something. Every time Maryland needs money, what do? Oh, yeah, they're going to make you pay a larger fee for your driver's license again and again and again. You just can't keep doing that. And so you're going to need another revenue stream. We're going to have to start getting into some other business areas, particularly start making maybe some loans to the corporations who want to move in here and start making money that way.
Okay. Mr. Bouchat.
Well, small businessmen drive our national economy, they drive our state economy, and they drive our local economy. We're not Wall Street, so I resent that comment a little bit. The key to our future is the investment we've made in our students over the years. We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in their children, and where are they spending their money? Where are they living? Where are they being taxed? In neighboring jurisdictions. All of our surrounding counties must love the investment we put in their children, especially Southern PA. Look how many of our children can't afford to live here. We've made a tremendous investment. The biggest investment we make annually is in our children, and they want to live here, and they can't live here. They are our salvation, whether you realize it or not. I hear all these people talk about, oh, we don't want any development, we don't want any living here. Well, we're cutting our throats. We are doing stupid business decisions by forcing our investment to be paid off in capital gains and dividends in neighboring jurisdictions, and they laugh at us. We need to bring those young adults back here. They want to get married. They want to have children. They want to have the life that we gave them, and we are denying them. If we can realize that and bring them back, we will gain financially off the investment we make annually into our children. And that is the solution.
Thank you. Mr. Burkett.
I think the federal government has it made. All they have to do is do some deficit spending. We can't do that. We have to balance the budget. And I think we have to defer to economic development if we're going to grow the economy to where we do have better jobs, we do have more affordable housing. I mean, we're talking about single-family homes. And we have to balance this. If we're not careful, people are not going to like Carroll County for what it was. It's going to be something different. Our wants keep going up. Every government agency is what I'm talking about. We do not have enough money. As I think the original question was, do we have enough money to go around? No, we do not. Our wants, every single agency keeps going up in their requests for money. They have their outstretched palms, like one of my friends told me. Now we have at least three new items that we have to budget for this year. We have a mandate from the state that says we have to have resource officers in every school, which I agree with. I think it's a great thing. I think it needs to be done. But they said, oh, it's on you to finance. We're not paying for it. Well, that's just like our legislature. They do that all the time. We have another issue, that's opioids, that our health department wants more money to combat the opioid issue. And we just talked about the fire and emergency services. It's inevitable. We're going to have to pay more, and they're going to have to pay a lot more in order to have a paid fire department. What I look at as a solution, it's not the total solution, but government is fat. And there's a lot of room to trim. And I think we need to start doing that. We need to start looking at every government agency and be proportional in how we trim it. Thank you.
Okay, kind of a follow-up question to that, since a few of you brought it up, brought up the term of affordable housing, and we'll start with Mr. Johnson, who I think is the first one to bring that up. What is your vision of that, and where do you believe that would be located in the county?
I think there's a lot of areas all the way up through this county. Union Bridge, New Windsor, they're dying up there. They need some economic development. If it could be made affordable up there, where we could get young adults up there, I think that would work. Where else I think it would work? There's so many places across the county that would just love to have a small, just a small little communities. You look at Montgomery County and you look at Frederick County and you say, I don't want that, and I totally agree. But there's got to be some kind of balance in this county where we can get some housing here. I'm not talking of real, cheap stuff. I'm talking about something that affordable where our teachers and our young people can move back here and enjoy the quality of life that's here. Our housing is so expensive that when we go to sell our house, who's going to buy it? We want somebody to come here so that when we move into a senior center, I want to have taxes there so that I'm going to be able to get ahead.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaffer.
I can't really in my mind picture a particular area that needs development more so than any other area. One particular area that doesn't really need any development is Westminster. They've got plenty of development as it is, and they're hurting for resources like water and space. And a particular issue is that this kind of goes back to income. You can't really create affordable housing for people who can't afford to buy anything. I mean, what's the definition of affordable housing when your income is so low you wouldn't be able to purchase it anyway? So it's sort of a, two sides of the same coin here. If we're going to create affordable housing, we're also going to have to create the jobs to buy said housing. And we're going to have to create those jobs in areas that need the development. And yeah, Union Bridge, New Windsor has been hit pretty hard. And if we're going to try to work out some particular plan as to where to do this, I really don't like some of the so-called smart developments and smart growth plans people have come up with, where they just want to turn the entire eastern half of Carroll County into Baltimore. They just want to turn all of Finksburg all the way down to Sykesville into a suburb of Baltimore. And I don't particularly see that as a path for anything affordable or just any way of proceeding forward with this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bouchat.
Well, I live in Woodbine, so when I drive into this neighborhood, this is high-density housing. and I don't see a bunch of crime going on. I don't see no boogeyman existing in Mount Airy because you have high-density housing. There needs to be a balance struck in housing. You know, there's a cycle. My first place was an apartment. My second was a townhouse. My third was a single-family home. And that's the process that young adults need to go through. And we need to provide that stepping system for them to move into the market. And as the cycle goes through, those individuals that own those big single-family homes eventually are in a health situation or financial situation where they can't afford it or maintain it, and they want to sell that home to a young couple of children, and then they want to move into condos and townhouses. The problem we have in this county is, because of the politics involved, there's a roadblock to stop that cycle from taking place. We have to have that cycle to have a vibrant, healthy economic community. And the location of that, I think, must be in the municipalities, like Mr. Grossnickle said, where we have water and sewer. Because if we're ever going to save this county's role to heritage, it's all come through high-density housing in our municipalities. Because it's wrong to throw developments up all over our county, gobbling up the farmland with $1 million or $500,000 houses with acre and more lots. That will destroy our heritage. That'll gobble up our heritage real fast. So even though it sounds bad to have high-density housing politically, it is actually part of our salvation, and it has to be done within the municipalities.
Thank you. Mr. Burkett.
I may be talking a little controversial here, but we do have affordable housing. But what is affordable housing? Is there a threshold figure that determines what's affordable and what's not? Are we talking about ownership? Are we talking about rentals? Are we talking about single family? Are we talking about apartment complexes? It doesn't matter. We have some of it. We have some of everything. However, unfortunately, we provide apartments for our affordable, hardworking citizens. What happens? They can pay, for an example, $1,300 a month. The landlord says, okay, well, down the street, the federal government's giving these people the ability to pay $1,600 a month. So I'm going to turn my complex into a Section 8 housing. Okay, I'm not saying anything wrong with that. However, that doesn't help our hardworking citizens that already live here. We need to be concentrating on promoting, I'd say, quality, reasonably priced, single-family homes, maybe incentivize the developer, maybe with a little better tax, maybe with less red tape, less regulation, to give him the opportunity to build these homes. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Grossnickle.
Well, that's been said. Affordable housing, to me, is a house that one of my sons may want to buy and could afford to buy. And you take Westminster with the development that's going on around there, none of that is really affordable housing unless you make $150,000 a year. $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes, to me, is not affordable housing. But rents, as Mr. Burkett said, play into that. A lot of people, they pay so much rent, they can't save to get that down payment to buy their first home. So maybe there's some way to, and there are ways out there. There are programs and places that help people buy their first home, but some of the requirements are so restrictive that they can't buy some of the older homes that are less expensive. So all these things play into it. Redevelopment. I think a lot of these towns have an older contingent that could be purchased and rebuilt. Tear down the single-family home, build a duplex, things like that. All these things kind of make sense. Most of your developers, they love high density. It's a better vehicle for turning a profit for them. You need less infrastructure, investment, everything. It's just a better thing. But again, I'm not sure we want to become Montgomery County where there's just seas of townhomes. I'm not sure that we want to see that in Carroll County, but there has to be a mix, and there has to be a way to provide housing for people who don't make the big money.
Okay, thank you. All right, this next question came in from our audience, and probably it's kind of a response to this last go-around of questions. What is your stance on private property rights versus economic growth? And we'll start with Mr. Shaffer.
Well, I would hold that the property owner would have more rights than the developer. Developers shouldn't just be able to come in and scoop up property. And it's just, I don't think not necessarily farmland, I don't want to keep coming back to that all the time, but we just don't want to tear up property by these developers, just eroding, just outright theft in some cases of private property in order to build some of these developments. So, yeah, I would support the property owner and not the developer in that case.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bouchat.
This is a tricky issue because we have ag preservation, which eliminates the property owner's rights to develop his property, but we value it and it's good. So it's difficult to determine where your rights begin and where it starts with your property. But as someone who's a conservative, I'm all about individual property rights and you do what you want with your property. But we have zoning restrictions, we need to conform to the zoning. But it's hard to say because the more our government gets involved in the regulation of your property, the more rights you as an individual surrender. So it's a give and take. It's hard to strike the balance. You have to get feedback from the people, your constituents, get their input and determine what's good to develop their property or not develop their property. But when we put restrictions on people's property, there's a lot of farmers out there who might want to sell their property. They worked it hard. Their children don't want to work the farm, but they'd like to sell it and get a windfall profit. And they might not be able to because of the restrictions we put on them, outside of voluntarily doing it in ag spreads. So it's very difficult and very controversial. I don't have all the answers, but I think it's important for us as a community to have input on these issues.
Mr. Burkett.
When it comes to private property rights, I give no quarter. I will fight for private property rights every time, in every case, and I will not relent. I've seen a case in Frederick County, maybe about 20-some years ago, that they used eminent domain to take a man's farm that has been in his property for generations. Was it an emergency? No. It was for a landfill. I think that was a heinous crime on the part of the Frederick government. I've seen other instances of eminent domain, and it's just as bad. I will fight for the private property rights of every individual over economic development every single time. And I just, that's me. Thank you.
Mr. Grossnickle.
I agree with these gentlemen. Private property is just that, it's private property. And I do not like eminent domain. I can't even conceive of a time or a situation where eminent domain should apply in the United States. It just should not. I'm all for ag preservation. I think that Carroll County is basically, that's why people come here, for the ag aspect of Carroll County. I grew up on a dairy farm. I still help my uncle and my dad. They don't milk anymore, but they still crop farm, and I help them when I'm able. I'm a farmer at heart. And I believe that we need to preserve that. I would like to see more done for, as Mr. Burkett said, or Mr. Bouchat wanted, but about the farmer whose their kids don't want to farm, and they just want to sell. Maybe there's a way to help someone who wants to farm realize his dream through that, so that farm doesn't have to be sold to development or what have you. We need to protect the farms. The ground in Carroll County and in this general area, it needs very little in the way of irrigation to grow crops. And that's a wonderful asset to have. Even on the Eastern Shore, they have to irrigate a lot to grow crops. So when you don't have to, it's definitely a plus. And we should preserve that farm ground for that reason. And I know I kind of got off the personal property thing, but I'm with Mr. Burkett. Every single time, personal property should trump everything else. It just should.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
I'm for personal property rights. I do not think that the government has the right to come in and say, I'm going to take a piece of your land for a purpose. If they do, they should, and they can work it out, and it's going to, they're going to pay them the right amount or what that person thinks that property is worth or what the value is. then that's another thing. But I'm for property rights. Nils just went through, the Nils Farm just went through this with the town. They tried to put a trail through there. And not tried, but the town wanted to, they're putting together trails. And the Nils said no. And that's the end of the story.
Okay. A few of you brought up ag preservation, and that's obviously, if you've been following the commissioner's budget discussions, that's come up a few times now. The county has more than 70,000 acres in preservation. What's your stance on that? Where should the county consider taking some money out of ag pres, as has been proposed recently, to fund some of the other things that are necessary in the county, or no? And I think, Mr. Bouchat, you're first up.
Ag preservation is vital for the preservation of our heritage in this county. And since we're short on funds, the Commissioner Board is working today on shifting those funds around, pulling money out of ag pres to address other issues. Once again, it's another very difficult question to answer. I don't have the answer. We need more money, actually, to solve all these problems. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul, as the saying goes, and it's getting quite ridiculous. I don't know what the answer is outside of generating more money to save our agricultural, but where does it end? I mean, at what level do we have enough ag pres? Will it be forever? I mean, where's our target? I don't know. I guess if I become commissioner, I'd have to be debriefed on that, and we have to have a target figure instead of constantly spending over and over again each year. When is enough enough? Where's our target? I don't know, but we need to figure that out, and that will determine how much money should be allocated to it. But we do have much more pressing issues, such as the opioid epidemic, which is drawing funds out of ag pres. And as much as I want the opioid epidemic addressed, it still bothers me that money's being pulled away from maintaining our heritage. What is the answer? I don't have it. None of us have it. But somehow or another in the future, we have to figure this out.
Mr. Burkett.
We do have a goal. It's 100,000 acres. And if we take that money out that the commissioners voted to do that today, or whenever it was recently, out of ag pres, it's totally unfair. That would set ag pres back 5 to 10 years. It's totally unfair to our farmers. The farmers, what is ag pres? Ag pres is simply where they got the name, preservation of our agricultural assets. And if the farmer says, okay, I'm ready to retire, I need my money for retirement, I'm going to sell my property to the developer. The county says, okay, we will pay you to sell your rights to us and not develop it. That's fine. The farmer says he's still happy. Okay, and we still have the availability of those fields for agricultural production in the future, if need be, regardless of who farms it. So, taking the money, where else are you going to get the money for these new budget items? Everybody says, well, we got to take it from somewhere. Well, county's budget is $400,000, $400 million, excuse me. Do you take 0.5% or 1/4%? What do you have? You need $1 million or $2 million to fund these things. Take that 1/4% off of every county agency, and they're not going to feel it. Why take it out from one and punish one whole agency, one whole entity? That's it.
Mr. Grossnickle.
As I said, ag preservation is near and dear to my heart, and we should not rob from that project.
Okay. Mr. Johnson.
I think the commissioners today did the right thing. I think taking a small portion of that money out, I think it's 2.5 million is what we put in per year, I think. And I'm not sure the percentage that they voted on today to take it out over a period of 3 years. So it's just a 3-year period of time that we're going to cut back on ag preservation. I think we're at 70,000 acres right now, heading towards 100,000 that was mentioned. And I also agree with Commissioner Howard on this when he said he's not convinced that these farms are actually in jeopardy. I would like to see and I'd like to see some proof that ag pres is really keeping developments out of some of these areas. We're not seeing any development in Carroll County right now anyway. The budget's tight. We are running so lean. This small portion of the money was used to actually make the budget. this year. Thank you.
Mr. Shaffer.
I support the Ag Preservation Program, and just the act of, at any time, taking money out of one fund to pay a deficit in another fund just means you couldn't plan the budget in the first place. As far as to whether or not the farm land that is being preserved is currently used, that's really a moot issue, because part of preservation is reserving it for the future. Whether or not it's currently being used today is immaterial. But whether or not that is used in the future and who would be using that into the future, I don't see any particular reason why we couldn't allow 4-H Club, Future Farmers of America, or even community farms use that land. But what the land is used for, that's not really the question. The question is, can we take money from the program for another program? I wouldn't do that. I mean, if you're going to be robbing, just taking money back and forth, shuffling it like a deck of cards, then you apparently never knew how to make a budget in the first place. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to do one last question before we do our closing statements, and we'll start with Mr. Burkett this time, I believe. Would you be supportive of a move from the commissioner form of government to a charter form of government?
In a word, no, I would not. Why not? It's been voted down 6 times in the past. Our citizens don't want it. What good is it? It's extremely expensive. It concentrates the power into one individual instead of 5 individuals. It creates a whole new layer of bureaucracy and a whole new layer of salaries and a whole new layer of benefits. This is expensive. Our county can't afford it. And it doesn't get cheaper. It doesn't save us any money in the long run. It's extremely expensive to implement. Taxes have tripled in Frederick since they put in charter government. In Anne Arundel County, there's been about 245 new laws enacted the first year the charter government was enacted. The taxing power is into one individual, and there's many, many more reasons that I will absolutely oppose charter government.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grossnickle.
No, I would not support it, and I couldn't say it any better than Mr. Burkett said, honestly.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
I've been asked this question before, and my wife and I have had a couple discussions on it, and I'm up and down, back and forth, but to be honest, I like the 5 commissioners. I have thoroughly enjoyed the past several months watching them go at each other. It has been very, very, very entertaining. It actually shows our government at work, and having 5 commissioners come to a consensus to do something is really tough. And when they have a 5-0 vote, I think they made the right decision. 4-1, I think they made the right decision. 3-2, I think they made the right decision. I think they've done a good job. I really do. I'm pretty proud of what I've watched over the past several months. The only thing I wish they would do is the last couple of sessions, there's been a little too much joking amongst some of them, and I think it needs to be taken very seriously, especially as hard as it's been this budget session. So I have to say, not for county or charter government.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shaffer.
I'm honestly against the 5 commissioner by district system, really. When that got put up to referendum, that was a change that was wholly unnecessary. I mean, if 3 commissioners voted at large have trouble making decisions, how is 5 commissioners by district going to be any better? And some of these districts that we lined up and drew the map on are just not really adequate. I mean, to be honest, most decisions when it comes to the county, a lot of discussions are always about Westminster or Finksburg or some of the larger, municipal areas. You get into an area that's more rural, like up near Tawnytown, they're going to be left out a little bit. I really don't like the 5 district system. But the charter government system is just a completely different breed of animal that is just, I don't know why everybody keeps fighting for this. You're recreating the same bureaucratic nightmare we have in our federal government. Why do you want it? It doesn't work there. It doesn't work at the state level. Why are you creating this whole separate executive, legislative branch system here locally? It's such a small area. We don't need that kind of bureaucracy. And you're just recreating the same headache you're having at the federal level. Why do you want it? And if you were to check the laws that govern charter governments, whatever charter we come up with has to be in line with Maryland standards. They set the laws on what our charter government's going to be, just like our ethics ordinance. So what's the point of creating a charter government that you don't have a say in its design in the first place? So, no, I'm completely against it.
Thank you. Mr. Bouchat.
As someone with an education in political science, this is another issue that's very passionate to me. Do you realize that the Commissioner of Form of Government is a holdover from colonial British rule? It was to keep Arab governments tethered to their authoritarian rule. Right now, as a Commissioner of Government, we are under the supervision of the Maryland General Assembly. We are a Republican county. That means we ultimately answer to a Democrat-controlled institution. And the number one tenet of our United States Constitution, which has kept our republic thriving for over 200 years, is the separation of executive and legislative authority. Our founding fathers sat down in the Constitutional Convention knowing they had commissioner of government all over the 13 states. And they chose not to create a commissioner of government to rule our nation. That's why we have a president and we have a Congress. It is why we have a governor and a Maryland state legislative body, the General Assembly. It is imperative to have our systems of government pulling at one another to stay in balance. This whole thing about charter government being bad is the boogeyman. There is absolutely no financial data to support that will increase our cost of government. What increases our cost of government is economic inflation, population growth, and the individuals we elect to represent us in those institutions. And when you say that this county would fall apart of charter government, what you're really saying is you don't trust any of the citizens in this county to rule themselves, that ultimately we must be subservient to the Democrat-controlled General Assembly. So one of the best things that could happen in this county is to elect separate institutions with a county executive to run and administer the government, which would be far more efficient than what we have, and the county council be the deliberating body which addresses exactly what the commissioner body is doing now.
All right. Thank you. All right. So with that, we will wrap up with 2-minute closing statements, and we will start with Mr. Grossnickle.
Hey, well, thank you all for sitting through this with us. And I hope that through the answers that I've given that you have a little better idea of who I am and what I stand for. My wife always says that I don't talk about myself enough or the things that I accomplished in Union Bridge. And she's right. I have a hard time with that. But 7 years ago, I lost a re-election bid for mayor in Union Bridge. And I was disappointed, truly was. I was working on things and I thought I was doing a good job, but politics is politics. So I could have walked away, said, okay, they don't want me, I don't want them. But I didn't, because that would have made it about me, and it was never about me. It was always about the town and about the people. So I asked to fill the open position on the Planning and Zoning Board, and that's what I've been doing for the last 7 years, so that I could still be part of the solution. And that's what I would like to do as commissioner. So thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
It's amazing when you're in a room with real people with real aspirations. The central theme is to attack the problems, not each other. People want to be heard. They want to talk about serious issues and real solutions. This takes open and honest communication that will not be drowned out by distorting the truth. This means keeping our county departments focused on local solutions that will protect our communities, families, and make decisions today that plan for our future stability. I will work hard for all to do this. I will work with my fellow commissioners respectfully, with dignity and equals. I will work for and engage all Carroll County citizens so you can focus on what really matters, family. I will provide a voice and represent the needs of all District 4 constituents, honestly, openly, with integrity and accountability. I will be fiscally prudent with county resources while being socially responsible. I will be a champion for Carroll County Public Schools and our dedicated county employees. I will stand firm and support the needs and concerns of our public safety officials. I will support the recruiting, training, and retention needs of our volunteer and professional emergency services. Now is the time for we, the citizens of Carroll County and District 4, to work together to preserve the rural beauty and quality of life that we are so blessed with in Carroll. I ask for your vote. We can do this right together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shaffer.
Well, I hope that I've shown that I'm interested in the investment of Carroll County in the future and how I really would like to get things done, and I would like to put forth ideas that really are progressive and are not constrained by the status quo on how we just seem to keep falling into the same traps over and over again. And I really want to break out of that cycle. And I don't really want to see the next commissioner board really just pass through the same plans and agendas that they have already the past few years that have just done nothing but just torn apart our services and infrastructures and really have not given a future to the students and the children and the families that live here. And I really hope to bring forth some ideas and some fresh perspective to the commissioner board.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bouchat.
Well, good leaders say things that are controversial and not always popular, but they are the right things to do. And I think I've taken that position numerous times. I've ran for public office numerous times, and I can't get through the Republican primary because I'm considered too liberal in some aspects. But what's most important for this county, as you well know, is money. That's what needs to be solved. We have a cash flow problem, just like a business. And it's going to take a businessman's leadership to change that around, because we're presently in a rut. We have a society and a culture which is good, but it's not generating revenue. And we can talk about all these issues and the politics of it, but at the end of the day, this county needs to bring more revenue into it or it will fail and we'll have problems. And I'm hoping that my policies and my leadership can lead this county into the future, because the future of this county is not going to be completely what it was 20 or even 10 years ago. We're facing modern issues, the opioid epidemic, the baby boomers going into their senior years. All these things are putting a stress on us, and we need to have leadership to address them. So I'm not always going to say what's the most popular thing, but what I ask of you is to have respect for me and give me a chance to lead this county on its next commissioner board. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Burkett.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge my fellow candidates, and I want to thank them for their civic conscience and their desire to contribute to our county's well-being. As you have all heard the old cliche about campaign promises are made to be broken, that is not true. I remember our predecessor had a campaign slogan, "Promises kept." I think he's done a magnificent job of it. I, too, will keep my promises, but the key is to promise what one can confidently deliver. You have heard what I stand for, and my promise to you is that I will stand up for those principles in every issue or decision that I make. That is why you would vote for me. I am happy with life, and I do not aspire to this office for money, power, or prestige. I am doing this for you, my friends, my fellow citizens, and taxpayers. You have wants, needs, and rights. Your wants are negotiable, but your needs are much more highly regarded. But your rights are inalienable, and I will forever fight for and defend them unfailingly. You deserve a government that understands that it is of, by, and for the people, not the other way around. Reckless spending and disregard for private property rights cannot be tolerated. Believe me, I'm aware of the issues facing the county. Closed schools sitting idle at great expense, declining school enrollment, teacher salaries, deputy salaries and disability benefits, comprehensive rezoning, the need for capital expenditures, government control of fire and emergency services, the opioid crisis, school security, a potential charter government issue, the needs for our senior citizens and veterans, agricultural preservation, and a serious conflict of interest ethics ordinance, and I might add, an overzealous, reactionary legislature in Annapolis, to name a few. Funding is needed everywhere, and we must find it without undue burdening on you, the taxpayer. I understand the huge responsibility of my office. I will conduct myself with civility, openness, fairness, and with the ultimate reliance on the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States. My door is always open, so come in and say hi, and thank you once again.
Thank you. All right, and with that, we'll turn it back over to Mr. Charles Harrison.
Thank you. We'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the candidates for the commissioner slot for participating with us this evening. Also, we'd like to thank our moderator, Mr. Wayne Carter, with the editor for the Carroll County Times. And we'd like to thank you, the audience, the live audience that participated with us tonight, particularly those of you that sent those thought-provoking questions in to us. We certainly appreciate that. And finally, we'd like to thank the Mount Airy Senior Center for providing this space for us tonight. You know, the previously broadcast educational forum will be rebroadcast again on channels 19 and 23, beginning on April the 30th. For more information, please check us out at our website, carrollmediacenter.org. And finally, before we leave, we'd like to encourage each and every one of you who are eligible residents to make sure you register to vote before the June 5th deadline. You know, voting is not just a right, it is a responsibility. We encourage you to carry out that responsibility. And again, thank you for participating with us tonight. Good night and have a safe drive home. Thank you very much.